You smile. Brilliant. My kids are going to love it. Okay, so I'm Nick Vale. I've just had a rather eloquent introduction. I guess I know about three things. So the first thing I know about is I know about media. So I know about media planning, and I'm going to show you a media presentation. The second thing I know about is I know about communications in general. And after spending a lot of time as a media practitioner, I became more of a communications generalist. I did lots of consultancy work with companies to help them bring all the different strands of their communications together and start to bring some of the silos together to create great work. And in doing that, I guess I know about my third thing. And the third thing I know about is ideas. And I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years thinking about ideas in our industry and thinking about how they work and the constructs behind them and where they might be going. And I guess today's presentation is one that brings all those things together. Today, I've called it just Media Ideas in 2013, but behind it, I think, is a bigger question. And the question that lies behind it is a simple one, and it's what does good look like? What does good look like in our industry today? And I think that's a very interesting question, because I think in our business, we're in a really, really interesting place. So let me start by giving you my view on where we are as an industry. So this is the only kind of media-y type chart I'm going to show today. Everything else is a picture. And this chart is what I would call a long view on influence. So this chart makes an assumption about, or a hypothesis, if you like, about all the things that I think have influenced people from about 500 AD to about 2500. So it takes a view as to what's going to be important about 500 years in the future. The good news is that actually there are really only three things that have influenced people over time. So the first thing that influenced people was word of mouth. And between about 500 AD, when we were sitting in the Dark Ages, through to about 1439 or thereabouts, word of mouth was the only thing which was influencing people. So if I was a media planner in 1300, I would have had a pretty good life. My media plan would have had marketplace gossip on it. I might have had some traveling minstrels, maybe a little bit of town crier if I wanted an upweight. And then in 1439, something quite dramatic happened. And what happened was that Gutenberg invented the variable type printing press. And in so doing, he overnight created broadcast media. And for the first time in history, we were able to take a message, we were able to very, very quickly replicate that message exactly many, many, many times, and then distribute that message to lots and lots of people. And broadcast media caught on. It became quite popular quite quickly. People learnt to read, and then things like newspapers arrived. And then it got a real shot in the arm when the radio arrived. And then it became really massive when television arrived, and television became the real kind of driver in the massive influence of broadcast media to humanity. And broadcast media continued to increase in influence until the night of February the 28th, 1983. Does anyone know what happened on the night of February the 28th, 1983? No? The final episode of MASH was aired in America. The highest ever rated television show in TV history. It got an 8.9 rating, so 89% of the available US population watched that show. And no other show has had such an enormously high rating. It's actually the highest rate, it was actually the highest audience show, sheer audience numbers show in history up until the 2010 Super Bowl. Okay. And since that night, on February the 28th, in 1983, we have not been able to take a single message and then to deliver that message to so many people at once, to such a large percentage of the audience at once. And what's happened, of course, is that media's fragmented. We've had to put our messages in more places. And so you could argue that broadcast media has actually been declining in influence. The ability to influence an individual or a number of people with a single message has been in decline. And it will continue to decline. The good news is that something new has arrived. And the new thing arrived on the 4th of February 2004. And do you all know what happened on the 4th of February 2004? The Facebook was launched. Correct, the Facebook was launched. And the Facebook was really the start of proper social media as we know it. And what the Facebook did was it allowed us to start to think about the individual. It allowed us to start to collect data. So pulling on some of the stuff that Roger was talking about earlier, it allowed us to start to collect data on the individual and speak to the individual directly. What we call addressable media, addressability. And addressability is going to continue in influence. Addressability is going to become the big thing. We're still at very, very early days on it. They've just turned on addressability on some US TV networks, in some US cable areas. So I can sit in my house in some areas of America, and I can be sitting next to you, my next door neighbor, and we could be watching NASCAR on television, and I will get a different set of ads to you. So the question, what does good look like, I think is an interesting question, because we're at a really, really interesting place in the world of comms. We're at a crossroads. Now, I guess that to answer this question, you would suppose that I'd need to make a load of predictions. And if you had caught me 5 years ago when I was young and stupid, I would probably have done that. But my view on prediction is that they tend to be very, very wrong in our business. So I'm not going to predict the future. This is a picture of Paris that was painted in 1900, and it was a prediction as to what Paris would look like in the year 2000. And I was in Paris last week, and unfortunately it was not like that. So I'm not going to make predictions. I'm going to make one prediction. I'm going to predict what's not going to happen. I predict that the media agency of 2016 will not look like this. Yeah, I predict it will not look like this. And you laugh, but actually, lots of people think it might. There are lots of people who think that the media is increasingly becoming automated format. That increasingly we're using DSPs and all this stuff to automatically trade media with lots and lots of computers. The bottom line is that actually we have to be about communication, and communication is about people, and communication is about ideas. And you can look at all that stuff that happened through history. You can look at all that stuff that, in my first chart, and you can say, what is it? Even though we moved from word of mouth and traveling minstrels through to television spots, through to this thing that's coming now, there are fundamentals that remain the same, that link all those things together. The ability to tell an amazing story, the ability to be bold and brave and new in the way that you approach stuff, the ability to challenge people. Look at that brilliant Romanian case study that we saw earlier. The ability to drive simplicity into an incredibly complex communication as well. Those things still remain important. I guess you could say that this crossroads that we're at is actually really quite a fantastic place to be. Because we've never lived in an age where there is so much opportunity to us as communications people. There are new things arriving every minute. There's all this stuff that we can do. All these different directions that we can go in. But it's actually incredibly confusing. And a lot of this stuff isn't actually very useful. A lot of it will take you into blind alleys. A lot of it will mean that you give too much precedence, too much worth to things which are just today's little bit of excitement, little bit of fluff. And so I guess the real challenge that faces us today is to say, what are the things that are here now that are interesting? What are the things that we should be learning from and developing further? In other words, what does good look like today? And so what I'm going to do now and for the rest of this is I'm just going to talk about 5 things that I think are important now. Yeah, 5 things that I think are important now, and I think that if we develop them, will take us to really exciting work next year and into the year after. I won't go any further than that. Yeah, so what are the 5 things that are making me really excited? Okay, so here's the first thing. So the first thing is what I call the movement from big ideas to long ideas. I hate big ideas. I hate big ideas. I've spent the last 10 years working with brands who were searching for the elusive big idea. But I don't know what big means, because bigness isn't really a measure of anything. What does big mean? Does it mean good? Does it mean strategic? Does it mean really exciting? Does it mean all that stuff? I don't know. And I've found that in most of the brands that I've worked with, bigness kind of means strategic, and it means that it has the ability to travel into lots of different disciplines. So if you like, it provides that glue that links stuff together. The truth is that 80% of the big ideas I've come across are actually advertising ideas in disguise. They're based around a narrative that sits on a film. And there are very few of them that are genuinely big. And the ones that do travel tend to be very cultural, which means they don't travel geographically very well, or the time runs out on them because culture's always changing. So I think we need to start thinking about a new type of idea, about what I would call a long idea. Long ideas are ideas that are much more tangible. You can see them. You can point at them. Yeah, they don't exist as a couple of words. I guess the most famous and really the first long idea is Nike Plus. And we've already touched on the wristbands earlier today. So Nike Plus is really the first great long idea. Nike Plus has a digital hub. It sits online predominantly. But what it's done is it's evolved over time. And the beauty of it is that it has a backbone that's always there, that's tangible, that you can see, that it's evolved over time to meet Nike's business needs, but also to meet the needs of their consumers, to meet runners' needs. And what they do is they change it. They improve it. They spin things off it. But it's always got a solid backbone, a foundation that's always there. I talk about bonfires and fireworks. Traditionally, we've spent a lot of time in our industry talking about fireworks. Fireworks are little bursts of excitement that exist in the communications landscape for a few months. Like the Roma campaign we saw was a brilliant firework. And then it disappears. But Nike Plus is a bonfire. It continues to burn. It burns and burns. And then every now and then you throw a new piece of fuel on it. Give it some new excitement. Take it in a new direction. We need to get much better at creating these. There aren't many of them around, actually. There aren't very many of them. One that I do like and that I think has enormous potential is one that's been built in America over the last couple of years for American Express. It's called Small Business Saturday. And American Express realized that in the current economy, small business in America is incredibly threatened. Yeah, the Walmarts are taking over everything because they can do it cheaper. And so small businesses are very threatened, but people feel very close to their mom and pop stores in their high street. And so what Amex have done is they've created a Facebook hub for small business, where small businesses can go and they can chat to other small businesses who work in the same business. They can go and negotiate themselves group discounts on product. They give a percentage of their advertising space over to those small businesses too, so they can advertise themselves. And then once a year, they do something called Small Business Saturday, where if you go and spend an Amex card in one of the small businesses, you get a discount. The US government's got really behind it because they see it as a very positive thing. And so here's Barack Obama tweeting about it last year. Facebook is its hub, but it exists in lots of other places too. And what you'll see is it's continuing to evolve. It's a very, very interesting idea. Okay, so that's my first one. So here's the second thing that I think is really interesting. It's what I call digital ideas that live beyond the screen. So we spend a lot of time thinking about digital. But most of us, when we talk about digital, we talk about PCs, phones. Now we all talk about phones all the time. But I think actually the really cool digital stuff exists outside of those screens. So here's a hypothesis on it. So I think for the last 20 years, humanity has been trying to make technology easier to use. Yeah, we've been trying to make technology easier to use. So what we've been doing is if you think about a computer 20 years ago. Do you remember them? They had like green, flickering screens, and you needed to use loads of code to get anything out of it. It was a nightmare. And then I look at my son now, who's 3 years old, and I look at him with an iPad, and it's amazing. His ability to use it is incredible. So we've made technology incredibly easy to use, and that's what we've been looking for. I think now we're at a tipping point. I think we're no longer in the business of making technology easy to use. We're now in the business of augmenting humanity via technology, of making technology something that makes us better, that makes our lives easier, that makes our lives more fun. And for that to work, we need it to step away from the screen. We need it to start to live in the real world with us. There's lots of talk now about the Internet of Things. The first idea, I think, that really developed this was Nike. So I promise this is the last Nike one I'll do. Was Nike. And Nike created something called the Chalkbot. Have you seen the Chalkbot before? Yeah, so the Chalkbot was big news about 4 years ago. And it was really the first real idea that took stuff that was digital and made a real-world impact with it. And if you remember, the Chalkbot sprayed messages that you could text it on the road of the Tour de France, and your message would be there. And then it took a photo of it and told you what time the Tour de France cyclist would be riding over it. And these things are continuing to develop and getting more and more sophisticated. So here's something that we have in development at the moment at Maxis. So we have a unit called Metalworks, and Metalworks is a creative technology division. And I'm using this example because I'm in India and I love cricket. So I'll use 2 cricket examples. So this is the first one. And what Metalworks have developed is we've developed a cricket glove. And the cricket glove has a sensor in it and a USB stick. And you go out and play cricket with your mates, And every ball that is bowled at you, it records. And every time you hit the ball, it records where it went. And then you take your USB stick out and you plug it in your computer, and it deconstructs your game. So you can see how you play. You can see how the bowler's bowling at you. Who wants one? You want one. You get the free one. Okay. So technology that lives in the real world is kind of becoming bigger and bigger and more important. And I think that as a planner or as a creative person or as a media person, it is incumbent on you to start to think about how you take technology away from the screen. Okay, the next thing is what I call storytelling across channels. I love storytelling. Yeah, I love storytelling. I think it's the core of our business. Traditionally, we've told stories usually through 30-second spots, or maybe 60s, or 2 minutes if we can get away with it. Yeah, and we've created very compact, well-crafted, beautiful to look at, incredibly engaging pieces of entertainment. What we're seeing now is we're seeing smart media planning combined with great creativity are enabling brands to start to take stories outside the 30-second spot and start to let stories get told across the real world through multiple channels. So the consumer pieces them together and creates something which is quite magical and quite wonderful and quite real as a result. Here's a campaign that was launched last year in Sweden by the Swedish Post Office. And what they did in Sweden, there are two celebrities who used to judge a program called Pop Idol, which is a really big show in Sweden. And these two celebrities, they fell out. They hated each other. One of them was a very beautiful pop star, and the other was her ex-manager. And they hated each other, very publicly hated each other. And what the guys in the Swedish Post Office did was they reconciliated them. And they did it without using any letters. So this conversation went between these two people using different channels over time. So it started off with her putting an ad in a newspaper saying, "Hey, Bert, you know, maybe we should kind of bury the hatchet." And then here's Bert responding, "Okay, calling you a slut perhaps wasn't the smartest thing. Anyway, Saturday's no good. How about Friday? Let's go for dinner." And this story played out over the case of a month, and they started talking together across radio stations. And it was magical, really, and the whole of Sweden got really into it. You know, when's the next message going to go out? Smart media planning, understanding how different channels can best convey a message, and then understanding that actually you can take a really great story, a narrative, and play it out over a long period of time doing that. We looked earlier at this idea that paid media drives to owned media drives to earned? Yeah, maybe. I think actually you don't have to do that. I think that actually you can start to combine them all together in a single thing. So here's an example from the UK. And this is paid media as entertainment, as opposed to as a direction. Paid media as entertainment, but paid media that is also entirely driven by the consumer via social media. So this is some work from Mercedes that came out at the end of last year. It's called #YouDrive. And Mercedes put out ads at the end of last year that you, the consumer, decided what happened in the ads by tweeting your choice of ending. So they would take 3 ads, buy 3 blocks of minute advertising in one show, and as the advertising ran, it would offer you the chance to tweet different things, and then it would look at the most popular outcome, and then it would play that outcome. So if you like, consumers were changing the advertising, changing the story in real time. That car, which launched in January, now makes up 6.2% of the UK hatchback market. Phenomenal. And Mercedes, which had an average age of 48, now has an average age of 37 off that campaign. Which brings me neatly to my next thing, which is social at the heart of campaign. Because we do a bit too much of this thing where we go paid to owned to earned. So what we'll do is we'll use paid media, we'll use these ads to drive people to a great brand experience online, and then we'll get them to talk about it in earned media. I don't buy it. I think that actually the really cool stuff nowadays is when you start to put earned at the heart, because that's what you're trying to get to anyway. So create ideas that are beautifully social. Create ideas that are designed to live socially. And that allow you to link things together. So here's my second cricket example for you. Have you seen this? Okay, this is really cool. So this is Australia. This is Vodafone in Australia last year. So Vodafone in Australia last year, they launched an app. It was called the Viewer's Verdict app. And what you could do is you could download the app onto your phone. And then when you were watching the live cricket, the app would ask you questions. Is he out or not out? Was it a catch? LBW? And it would ask you to vote. Very simple voting mechanic. And what they also did was they bought space on the TV show. So they had live banners coming up on television that showed you what the viewing public was voting for. At one point, 80% of people watching the TV show, watching cricket live on TV, were also interacting with the app. That's England, so he was definitely out. Here's another one which just cuts to the chase. So this is some work we did in Oz at the end of last year. So we were asked by the city of Canberra, has anyone ever been to Canberra? No, of course not. No one goes to Canberra. No one goes to Canberra. Canberra is meant to be one of the most boring, unfriendly places on earth. So the city of Canberra go, hey, it's our centenary and we want to attract loads of tourists to Canberra. And we're going to produce this beautiful, glossy brochure. We said, you must be kidding. You think we can do some advertising with beautiful pictures of Canberra and that's going to make people change their opinion? You need some social media. You need people to be talking. That's the only way you're going to change opinion about it. And you know what? We could do all our paid, owned, earned thing, but actually you're just wasting your money. Let's just do earned. So we took the media budget and we paid for 500 people to go to Canberra and have a bloody good time. And the deal was that they tweeted and Facebooked, YouTubed, all about what a great time they'd had. And then we took all their stuff and we compiled it into a human brochure. And the human brochure is a living, online tourist guide to Canberra that's made up entirely of the stuff that these people are talking about. And it's up there now, and you can see it, and it's always changing, it's always moving. Canberra wanted us to increase tourism by 10%. It hit 11% about 3 weeks ago. Straight for earned. I mean, it's outrageous, isn't it, to bribe people? We had 500 places. 31,000 people applied to be part of the human brochure. And I guess the last of my five is what I call the move from participation to protagonism. So as an industry, we, for the last 5 years, have been talking about participation. We need to encourage people to participate with the brand. Yeah, we want to create participation. Now, there are 3 participatory mechanics in the world. Okay, so the first one, you can do an event. That's so that I'm participating with all of you right now. We are participatory media. Fantastic. The second participatory mechanic you can do is you can do a promotion. And the third one you can do is a piece of content that people interact with in some way. What tends to happen in participation is it works a bit like us now. So there's a bunch of you, probably fewer of you than would be if I'd done it on television, but there's a bunch of you, and we have this kind of more meaningful one-on-one type of relationship. But it's still me looking down at you. Not looking down at you, sorry. Talking at you, as opposed to with you. And if I do talk with you, which we'll do in a minute, then you'll tweet in some questions, which I'll then answer. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go down and I'm going to talk to you as an individual and have a personal one-on-one conversation with you. And I'm not going to make you feel that you're the protagonist. That actually, this speech is designed entirely for you. And I've crafted it to meet your requirements because you are more important to me than me. But if we're going to be about addressability, then that's what we need to get to, don't we? If we're in a world where we can target an individual precisely and know lots and lots about them, don't we need to be crafting messages that do the same? I don't know what they look like yet, because there aren't very many of them. What we have to do is we have to do it with interest. We have to do it in a way that is still big. So it needs to be scaled protagonism, I call it. I found one example that I think does it pretty well. And that's the work that Coke did in Australia the year before last. I'm sure you've all seen this. This is really interesting. Because just by doing something as simple as putting your name on its bottle, Coke kind of made you feel important. And it also encouraged you to then go and share that bottle with your friends, so you made them feel important. And that's interesting. That's about making you feel the protagonist. And that's very powerful. And I think this idea, this scale protagonism idea, is really interesting. It's really cool. There's something in it that's magical. There's something in it that we should learn and grow and nurture, because that's where the future of our industry lies. And as addressability becomes more and more important, as it becomes the norm, this idea, I think, will help unlock the creative potential that lies within that. Okay, so I've got one more slide. This is my final slide. Everyone likes to have speeches that have quotes in, so I always also like a quote. So here, I usually quote from great philosophers of the past. And my choice of great philosopher of the past is Bon Jovi. But Bon Jovi are very, very smart. And in the mid-'80s, Bon Jovi said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And they're quite right. Don't get carried away by all the new shiny toys that sit in front of you, about the 5 things that I think are important, because the fundamentals remain the same, and you can't lose sight of them. You have to create brilliant, exciting, thought-provoking ideas. You have to be brave in those ideas. They have to challenge assumptions. You have to deliver them in a way that's commercial. And you have to deliver them in a way that's rooted in simplicity. And if you don't do that, then go home. Because just doing the cool stuff for the sake of it isn't going to win anyone any prizes. That's it.
So the first question I have here is from Nikita, and she's really talking about, I'm going to try and sort of do this on the fly rather than waste time just reading them, absorbing them, but this is regarding social campaigns, and there are a large number of social campaigns which are very clever, intelligent, and there are others which are very direct. So in your mind, what should be the kind of principles to be looking at when designing social campaigns, and you know, the ones which sort of you think are the right principles to create a great idea in the social environment?
Well, I'm going to direct you to Roger, actually, because I thought Roger's presentation nailed that pretty well. I mean, ultimately, you know, for me, I think about the idea. Is it an idea that has the flavor of an idea that lives well in that environment? And if you think about, you know, the easiest way, I think, to do that is to think about the particular culture of the social media world and start to leverage that. So if you think about the culture of the social media world, there are a number of things which it has done for human beings, which has changed the way that human beings behave. So the most obvious one of those would be the fact that it has made everybody public. So if you think about us 10 years ago, we were mostly private individuals. And if you wanted to find out who we were, the only thing you could do was probably look in a telephone directory. And what social media has done is it has given everybody a much more public side to themselves. Our public persona has become much, much bigger. And what that means is that we are much, much more conscious of how we behave in that environment, of how we portray ourselves as a public space. If you like, you know, and you look at the way that people behave on Facebook, everyone finds their most beautiful photo and uploads it. And if it's not beautiful enough, then you might stick it on a Mac and make sure it damn well is beautiful. And also, every time someone posts a photo of me drunk at a party, then I will post 6 photos of myself looking beautiful and handsome to undo the damage. So I am, if you like, fighting a personal PR campaign all the time. And it strikes me that there is an enormous role for brands to sit in social media and to provide that service, that personal PR campaign service, if you like. Equally, there is a whole culture of social media through stuff like oversharing and stuff like that you can just pick on those little insights and you can start to leverage those very quickly and create neat things which say, oh, you know, this is cool, this isn't, This
is a very interesting question, and I'm just going to put a bit of context to it before I read it out. And the context really is something that you covered, that the environment in media has become hugely fragmented, it's become very complex. And in this complex media environment, the question really is whether ideas can remain simple, considering the complexity which they have to deal with. And if you could just sort of articulate or share a few examples of what, when you talk of a simple idea in this complex environment, what exactly are we talking about?
Okay, so that is the art to comms, is simplicity. It's the whole thing. You know, it's what I spend my life trying to do, is trying to create simplicity from the ludicrous complexity that surrounds us. I see it rather like, there's a great story, which you may know, which is the story of the journalist who went to visit Picasso. So a journalist went to visit Picasso, and he walked into Picasso's studio, and there in the middle of the studio was this enormous great rock. And Picasso came from behind the rock holding a chisel and a hammer. And the journalist said, "Oh, Picasso, how fabulous to see you. What's with the rock?" And Picasso said, "The rock is a cow." And the journalist said, "How are you going to make the rock a cow?" And Picasso said, "I'm going to take my hammer and my chisel, and I'm going to knock all the bits off the rock that aren't cow off it, until only the beautiful cow that's sitting inside the rock reveals itself." And that's exactly what comms is like these days. We create an idea, and it's a cow, it's a rock, it's a big rock, and it's all this stuff. And it's got all this stuff bolted onto it. And the art to great communications is to get your hammer and chisel and knock all the bits off that rock that aren't cow, until you're left with the pure, beautiful, simple idea that lies within it. And that's the art. That's what it's all about. And the way to do that is to talk about it and to have really difficult conversations until you really understand what that cow looks like. And if you leave stuff early, you get left with complexity and you get lost.